Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. I'm actually on YouTube, actually also on Odyssey. I'm going to do some information on what we call a book by Fred Rodell called Woe Unto Lawyers. I read this book before, not online, but actually read it from the library book. Like to have the book myself. It would be worthy of getting a book of this nature because he was a professor at law, that is at Yale University. And so we're going to read from his particular book tonight. Again, today is the fourth day of March 2023. So let's get into the book, the meat of the book, that is. This is for those who have ears to hear and for those who have eyes to see. Fred Rodell, professor of law at Yale University, written in 1939. This is a quote from chapter 11, that is of Luke, verses 52. And these are despicable people, folks. They are. Woe unto you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You entered not in yourself, and them that were entering you and ye hindered. In other words, you don't enter yourself, and you prevent those from entering them also. The modern medicine men, that is, the law of the lawyer, the way it works. We're going to be getting to these particular chapters tonight. It's not a super long book, so it's super great. So let's get into the preface tonight. No lawyer will like this book. It isn't written for lawyers. It is written for the average man, and his purpose is to try to plant in his head, at the least, a seed of skepticism about the whole legal profession, its works and its ways. In case anyone should be interested, I got my own skepticism early. Before I ever studied law, I used to argue occasionally with lawyers, a foolish thing to do at any time, you see. When as frequently happened, they couldn't explain their legal points so that they made any sense to me. I rashly began to suspect that maybe they didn't make any sense at all, but I couldn't know. One of the reasons I went to law school was to try to find out. At law school, I was lucky. 10 of the men under whom I took courses were sufficiently skeptical and common sensible about the branches of law they were teaching, so that unwittingly, of course, they served together to fortify my hunch about the phoniness of the whole legal practice or process. In a series, I'm sorry, in a sense, they are the intelligent godfathers of this book. And though all of them would doubtless stringently disown their godchild, I think I owe it to them to name them. Listed alphabetically, they are Thurman Arnold, now Assistant Attorney General of the United States; Charles E. Clark, now Judge of the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals; William O. Douglas, now Justice of the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court; Felix Frankfurter, now Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court; Leon Green, now Dean of the Northwestern University Law School; Walter Hamilton, Professor of Law at Yale University; Harold Laskett, Professor of Political Science at the London School of Economics; Richard Joyce Smith, now a practicing attorney in New York City; and Wesley Sturges, that is Sturges, now director of the Distilled Spirits Institute; and the late Lee Tulin, Tulin. I know of two people here stand out. Felix Frankfurter I know of, and I know that Harold Lasky is another one, which also reminds me of the London School of Economics. We need to do a book on that also. By this time I got through law school, I had decided that I never wanted to practice law. I never have. I'm not a member of any bar. If anyone should want, not unreasonably, to know what on earth am I doing. Hold on just a second here, folks. I got some communique. What it was? Maybe not. Okay, let me continue. When I was mulling over the notion of writing this book, I outlined my ideas about this book and about the law to a lawyer who is not only able but also extraordinarily frank and perceptive about his profession. Sure, he says, but why give the show away? That clinched it for me. Chapter 1, Modern Medicine Men. The Law is a sort of a hocus pocus science by Charles Macklin, Macklin. In tribal times, there were the medicine men, you see. In the Middle Ages, there were the priests. Today, they're the lawyers. For every age, a group of bright boys learn in the trade and jealousy of the learning, who blend technical competency with plain and fancy hocus pocus to make themselves master of their fellow man. For every age, a pseudo-intellectual autocracy, guarding the tricks of his trade from the uninitiated and running after its own pattern, the civilization of its day. It is the lawyers who run our civilization for us, our governments, our business, our private lives. Most legislators are lawyers. They make our laws. Most presidents, governors, commissioners, along with their advisors and brain trusts, are lawyers. They administrate our law. All the judges are lawyers. They interpret it and enforce our laws. There is no separation of power where the lawyers are concerned. There's only a concentration of all government power in the lawyers. As the schoolboy put it, ours is a government of lawyers and not of men. It is not the businessmen, no matter how big, who run our economic world. Again, it is the lawyers who advise and direct every time a company is formed, every time a bond or a share of stock is issued, almost every time material is to be bought or goods to be sold, every time a deal is made. The whole elaborate structure of industry and finance is a lawyer-made house. We all live in it, but the lawyers run it. And in our private lives, we cannot buy a home or rent an apartment. We cannot get married or try to get divorced. We cannot die and leave our property to our children without calling on the lawyers to guide us. To guide us, incidentally, through a maze of confusing gestures and formalities that lawyers have created. Objections may be raised immediately that there is nothing strange or wrong about this. If we did not carry on our government and business and private activities in accordance with reasonable rules of some sort, we would have chaos, or else a reversal to brute force as the arbiter of man's affairs. True, but beside the point is that it is the lawyers who make our rules, and a whole civilization that follows them or disregards them at its peril. Yet the tremendous majority of the men who make up that civilization are not lawyers, pay little heed to how and why the rules are made. They do not ask. They scarcely seem to care which rules are good and which are bad, which are a help and which is a nuisance, which are useful to society and which are useful only to lawyers. They shut their eyes and leave to the lawyers the running of a large part of their lives. Of all the specialized skills abroad in the world today, the average man knows least about the ones that affect him most, about the things that lawyers call the law. A man who will discourse at length about the latest cure for Staphylococcus infection or describe in detail allergic symptoms cannot begin to tell you what happened to him legally, and plenty did when he got married. A man who would not dream of buying a car without an intricate and illustrated description of its mechanical workings will sign a lease without knowing what more than 4 of his 44 clauses mean or why they are there. A man who will not hesitate to criticize or disagree with a trained economist or an expert in any one of the dozen fields of learning will follow, unquestionable, that is meat, whatever advice his lawyer gives him, you see. Normal human skepticism and curiosity seems to vanish entirely whenever the layman encounters the law. There are several reasons for this mass submission. One is the average man's fear of the unknown and of the policeman. The law combines the threat of both. A non-lawyer confronted by the law is like a child faced by a pitch dark room. Mercilessly judges lurk there, ready to jump out at him. Ignorance of the law is no defense, as they say. Cowed and force, trusting he takes the lawyer's hand, not knowing what false steps he might make unguided, nor what punishment might then lie in wait for him. He does not dare display either skepticism or disrespect when he feels that the solemn voice of the lawyer, telling him what he must or may not do, is backed by all the mighty and mysterious forces of law and order from the Supreme Court on down on the cop on the corner. Then, too, every lawyer is just about the same as every other lawyer, you see. At least he has the same thing to sell, even though it comes in slightly different models and varying prices. The thing he has to sell is the law. And it is as useless to run from one lawyer to another in the hope of finding something better or something different or something that makes more common sense, as it would be useless to run from one Ford dealer to another if there were no Chevrolets or Plymouths or even bicycles on the market. There is no brand competition or product competition in the lawyer's trade. The customer has to take the law or nothing. And if the customer should want to know a little more about what he's buying is direct fees or indirect fees or taxes. The lawyer needs have no fear of losing business or someone else if they just plain refuse to tell. Yet lawyers can and often do talk about their product without telling anything about it at all. Have you ever deal with these people? Have you? They talk about all this other stuff. It's like fluff, and you have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. And that fact involves one of the chief reasons for the non-lawyers' persistent ignorance about the law. Briefly, the law is carried on in a foreign language. Not that it deals, as do medicine and mechanical engineering, with physical phenomena and instruments which need special words to describe them simply because there are no other words. On the contrary, law deals almost exclusively with the ordinary facts and occurrences of everyday business and government and living. But it deals with them in a jargon which completely baffles and befoozles the ordinary literal man who has no legal training to serve him as a trot. Some of the language of the law is built out of Latin or French words, or out of the Old English words, but for the law would long ago have fallen into disuse. A common street brawl means nothing to a lawyer until it has been translated into a felony or a misdemeanor or a tort. And any of those words, I should say, when used by a lawyer may mean nothing more than a common street brawler. Much of the language of the law is built out of perfectly respectable English words which has been given a queer and different and exclusively legal meaning. When a lawyer speaks for incidents of consideration, he is definitely not referring to kindness. All of the language of the law is such, as Mr. Dooley once put it, that a statute which reads like a stone wall to the lawman becomes for the corporation lawyer a triumphant arch. It is, in short, a language that nobody but a lawyer understands or could understand if we are to take the lawyer's word for it. But one of the most revealing things about a lawyer, that is, trade, is the unanimous inability or unwillingness or both on the parts of lawyers to explain their brand of professional pig Latin to men who are not lawyers. A doctor can and will tell you what a metatarsus is and where it is and why it is there, and if necessary, what is wrong with it. A patient electrician can explain to the satisfaction of a medium-grade mentality how a dynamo works. But try to pin down a lawyer, any lawyer or jurisdiction or proximity cause or equity title, words which he tosses off with authority and apparently familiarity, and which are part of his regular stock and trade. If he does not dismiss your question summarily with you're not a lawyer, you wouldn't understand, he will disappear into a cloud of legal jargon, perhaps descending occasionally to the level of a non-legal abstraction or to the scarcely more satisfactory explanation that something is so because the law says that it is so. That is where you are supposed to say, oh, I see. It is this fact more than any other, the fact that lawyers can't or won't tell what they are about in ordinary English. That is responsible for the hopelessness of the non-lawyer in trying to cope with or understand the so-called science of law. For the lawyer's trade is a trade built entirely on words. And so long as the lawyers carefully keep to themselves the key to what these words mean, the only way The average man can find out what's going on is to become a lawyer, or at least to study law himself, all of which makes it very nice and very secure for the lawyers. Of course, any lawyer will bristle or snort with this derision as the idea that what he deals is in words. He will tell you in propositions, concepts, fundamental principles, in short, in ideas. The reason a non-lawyer gets lost in the law is that his mind has not been trained to think logically about abstractions, whereas the lawyer's mind has been so trained. Hence, the lawyer can leap lightly and logically from one abstraction to another, or narrow down a general proposition to apply to a particular case with agility that leaves the non-lawyer bewildered and behind. It is a pretty little picture, you see. Yet, it's not necessary to go into semantics to show that it is a very silly little picture. No matter what lawyers deal in, the thing they deal with is exclusively the stuff of living. When a government wants to collect money and a rich man does not want to pay it, when a company wants to fire a worker and the worker wants to keep his job, when an automobile driver runs down a pedestrian and the pedestrian says it was the driver's fault and the driver says it wasn't, these things are living facts, not some airy abstractions. And the only thing that matters about the law is the way it is handled, these facts and a million others. The point is that legal abstractions mean nothing at all until they are brought down to earth. Once brought down to earth, once applied to physical facts, the abstractions become nothing but words, you see. Words by which lawyers describe and justify the things that lawyers do. Lawyers would always like to believe that the principles they say they work with are something more than a complicated way of talking about simple, tangible, non-legal matters, but they are not. Thus, the late Justice Holmes was practically a traitor to his trade when he said, as he did say, general propositions do not decide concrete cases. Of course not. To dismiss the abstract principle of the law as being no more in reality than high-sounding combination of words may, in one sense, be a trifle confusing. Law in action does, after all, amount to the application of rules to human conduct, and rules may be said to be inedible abstractions themselves, but there is a difference, and a big one. Anyone who pits on this platform will be fined $5. It is a rule and, in a sense, an abstraction, yet it is easily understood. It needs no lawyer to interpret it, and it applies simply and directly to a specific factual thing. But anyone who is willfully and maliciously spits on this platform will be fined $5, an abstraction of entirely different color. The law has sneaked into the rules in the words willfully and maliciously. These words have no real meaning outside of a lawyer minds until someone who spits on the platform is or is not fined $5, and they have none afterwards until someone else spits on the platform and does or does not get fired. The whole of the law is its concepts, its principles, its propositions is made up of willfully and maliciously of words that cannot possibly be pinned down to a precise meaning, and that are, in the last analysis, no more than words. As a matter of fact, the bulk of the law is made up of words with far less apparent relations to reality than willfully or maliciously. And you can look through every bit of the law, criminal law, business law, government law, family law, without finding a single rule that makes as much simple sense as anyone who spits on this platform will be fined $5. That, of course, is why non-lawyers can never make rhyme or reason out of a lawyer's attempt at explanation of the way the law works. The non-lawyer wants the whole business brought down to earth. The lawyer cannot bring it down to earth without, in so doing, leaving the law entirely out of it. To say that Wagner Labor Act was held valid because 5 out of the 9 justices in the Supreme Court approved of it personally, or because they thought it's wiser policy to uphold than to risk further presidential agitation for a change in the membership of the court. To say this is certainly not to explain the law of the case. Yet to say this makes a great deal more sense to the layman and comes to a great deal closer to the truth that does the legal explanation that the act was held valid because it constitutes a proper exercise of Congress, power to regulate interstate commerce. You can probe the words of that legal explanation to their depths and bolster them with other legal propositions dating back 150 years, and they will still mean, for all practical purposes, exactly nothing. There is no more pointed demonstration of the pointed demonstration of the chasm between ordinary human thinking and the mental processes of the lawyer than in the almost universal reaction of law students when they first encounter the law. They come to law school a normal, intelligent, normally curious, normal receptive group. Day in, day out, they're subject to the legal lingo of judges, textbook writers, professors, those learned in the law. But for months, none of it clicks. There seems to be nothing to take hold of. These students cannot find anything in their past, cannot find anywhere in their past knowledge or experience or a hook on which to hang all this strange talk or menras and fee simple and due process and other unearthly things. Long and involved explanations and lectures and law books only make it all more confusing. The students know that the law eventually deals with extremely practical matters like buying land, selling stock, and putting thieves in jail. But all that they read and hear seems to stem not only from a foreign language, but from a strange and foreign way of thinking. Eventually, their confusion founded though is in stubborn and healthy skepticism is worn down. Eventually, they succumb to the barrage of principles and concepts and all the metaphysical refinements that go with them. And once they have learned to talk the jargon, once they have forgotten their recent insistence on matters of factness, once they have begun to glory in their own agility at that mental hocus pocus that had them befuddled a short while ago, then they have become, in the most important sense, lawyers. Now they too have joined the select circle of those who can weave a complicated intellectual riddle out of something so mundane as a strike or an automobile accident. Now it will be hard, if not impossible, ever to bring them back, that is, to that disarmingly directly way of thinking about the problems of people in society which they used to share with the average man before they fell in with the lawyers and swallowed the law. Learning the lawyer's talk and the lawyer's way of thinking, learning to discuss the pros and cons of, say, pure food laws in terms of effectuation with a public contract is very much like learning to work cryptograms or play bridge. It requires concentration and memory and some analytical ability, and for those who become proficient in it, can be a stimulating intellectual game. Yet those who work cryptograms or play bridge never pretend that their mental efforts, however difficult and involved, have any significance beyond the game they are playing. Whereas those who play the legal game not only pretend but insist that their intricate ratiocination in the realm of pure thought after the necessary relation to the solution of practical problems. It is through the medium of their weird and wordy mental gymnastics that the lawyers lay down the rules under which we live. And it is only because the average man cannot play their game and so cannot see for himself how intrinsically empty of meaning their playthings are that the lawyers continue to get away with it. The legal trade, in short, is nothing but a high-class racket. It is a racket for more lucrative and more powerful and hence more dangerous than any of those minor and much publicized rackets such as ambulance chasing or the regular defense of known criminals, which makes up only a tiny part of the law business and against which the respectable members of the bar are always making speeches and taking actions. A John W. Davis, when he exhorts a court in the name of God and justice and the Constitution, and incidentally for a fee, not to let the federal government regulate holding companies, is playing the racket for all his work. So is the Justice Sutherland when he solemnly forbids a state to impose an inheritance tax on the ground that the transfer or a abstraction of the right to get dividends, another abstraction, did not take place geographically inside the taxing state. And so for that matter are all Coricorians and Cohens and Thurman Arnolds and the rest, whose chief value to the New Deal lies not in their political views, not even the administrative abilities, but rather in their adeptness at manipulating the words of the law so as to make things sound perfectly proper with other lawyers, that is, by manipulating different words in a different way, maintained are terribly inappropriate. The legal racket knows no political or social limitation. Furthermore, the lawyers, or at least 99.4% 44 100% of them are not even aware that they are indulging in a racket and would be shocked at the very mention of the idea. Once bitten by the legal bug, they lose all sense of perspective about what they are doing and how they are doing it. Like the medicine men of tribal times and the priests in the Middle Ages, they actually believe in their own nonsense. This fact, of course, makes their racket all the more insidious. Consecrated fanatics are always more dangerous than conscious villains. And lawyers are fanatics indeed about the sacredness of the word magic they call the law. Yet the saddest and most insidious fact about the legal racket is that the general public doesn't realize it's a racket either. Scared, befuddled, impressed, and ignorant, they take what is fed them, or rather what is sold them, I should say. Only once at age do the non-lawyers get, only once at age do the non-lawyers get not wise but disgusted and rebel. As Harold Lasky is fond of putting it, in every revolution the lawyers lead the way to the guillotine or the firing squad. It should not, however, require a revolution to rid society of lawyer controls, nor is it riddance by revolution ever likely to be permanent solutions. The American colonies had scarcely found themselves from the nuisance of the law by practicing ostracizing the pre-revolutionary lawyers out of their communities, a fact which is little appreciated when a new and homemade crop of lawyers sprang up to take over the affairs of the baby nation, that is. That crop, 150 years later, is still growing in numbers and in power. What is really needed is to put the lawyers in their place and out of the seats of the mighty is no more than a slashing of the veil of dignified mystery that now surrounds and protects the law. If people could be made to realize how much the vaunted majesty of the law is a hoax, and how many of the mighty processes of the law are merely logical legerdemain, that is, they would not long let the lawyers lead them around by the nose. And people have recently begun, bit by bit, to catch on. The great illusion of the law has been leaking a little as it edges. There was President Roosevelt's plan to add to the membership of the Supreme Court in order to get different decisions. Even those who opposed the plan, and they of course included almost all the lawyers, recognized by the very passion of their arguments that the plan would have been effective. In other words, that by merely changing judges, you could change the highest law of the land. And when the highest law of the land was changed without ever changing judges, and the same 9 men said that something was constitutional this year, which has been unconstitutionally only last year, then even the most critics of laymen began to wonder a little about the immunity of the law. It did not add to the public awe, that is, it did not add to the public awe of the law either when Thomas Dewey, grandstand prosecution of Tammany Hack, was suddenly thrown out of court under technicalities so piddling that every newspaper in New York City raised an editorial howl against a more or less routine application of law, and such minor incidents as the recent discovery that one of Staten Island's leading law practitioners had never passed a bar exam, and so was not officially a lawyer, do not lend themselves to the law prestige. Yet it will take a great deal more than collection of happenings like these to break down effectively the superstition of the grandeur of the law and the hold which that superstition has on the minds of most men. It will take some understanding of the wordy emptiness and irrelevance of the law, of the legal process itself. It will take some cold realization that the inconsistencies and absurdities of the law that occasionally come into the open are not just accidents but commonplaces. It will take some awakening to the fact that training in the law does not make lawyers wiser than other men, but only smarter. Perhaps an examination of the lawyers and their law set down in ordinary English might help achieve these ends. For despite what the lawyers say, it's possible to talk about legal principles and legal reasoning in everyday non-legal language. The point is that so discussing the principles and the reasoning and the whole solemn business of the law comes to look downright silly. Perhaps if the ordinary man could sit in black and white, how silly and irrelevant and unnecessary it all is, he might be persuaded in a peaceful way to take control of his civilization out of the hands of these modern purveyors of streamlined voodoo and chromium plate theology they call the lawyers. So that's the end of chapter 1. I'm going to conclude at this time. This is a lawyer, the professor, who's actually talking and wrote this book. He'd already saw what was going on and the threat of this taking place in his time. This was in 1939. So he'd already seen what Franklin Roosevelt was doing, what we call packing the court. He was wanting them to legalize what he was doing, you see. And so he was paying political favors. And most people are unaware of this. They don't even know this has happened in the past. And he almost succeeded. He almost succeeded, folks, what he did. And if you look at things, again, like I said, I recommend you go back. I've done a video on the missing 13th Amendment. This is back in the early 1800s. And this all deals with all this because there was already a threat that people saw, even within Congress, that is, that we don't need lawyers in these houses, in the Senate or into the House of Representatives, because if they get involved and become in power, they will destroy this country. And they have, you see. And destroyed not only this country, but they destroyed our economy, destroyed all things. At one time, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, as well as I recollect, there was no advertisement at all on television about a lawyer wanting your business. It was not acceptable. But nowadays, you hear it. I don't have television, but I know I hear it all over the place on a radio, and I also hear it on the internet here. And I'm like, I don't need this, you see. But I also have gone into a lawyer's office myself and have dealt with two lawyers, well, actually three of them. And they all dealt with certain issues to doing with my mom's passing away. And I needed some advice, and I made that first mistake with the particular lawyer, and he charged me, I think, $120 or $150 for basically 45 minutes of his time. Not a bad deal, is it? The second lawyer, I actually worked with a lawyer who I talked to and dealt with, and a particular issue in the family. And it was no problem. It was given the power of attorney. And then within a few months later, not that long later, it all changed. And he knew that was this. And so I found out the decision. And I went right back to him. He said, well, I don't remember that. And I'm like, bullshit. See, this is what kind of people these people are. They don't have any morals. All they care about is money, you see. And I dealt with a particular law agency that took place in a town called Hampton, South Carolina. And that's a big deal right now. I don't know if you're aware of this. Hampton's roughly the county seat of Hampton County. And the county seat has about 2,500 people living in the city. And then roughly is less than 20,000 people live in the whole county. And there's a particular attorney that's got in trouble. It's nationwide here. That was a lawyer another lawyer I had to deal with. Not him personally, but his law firm. His law firm was almost the biggest building in downtown Hampton. And you're talking about 2,500 people. His law office must have employed probably, I'm guessing, at least 10 or 15 lawyers full time. So he just got in trouble here recently in the state of South Carolina. See, he murdered his wife and his child. It's the Murdaugh family. And it's a big deal. That's who these people are, you see. He had a major gambling problem in his life. And you're welcome to look into what there have been videos that actually talk about his family, such and such. And he got out of control. He started owing money that he couldn't pay off. He got away with it for a long time, but eventually got in trouble. So this is a case that's taken place here in South Carolina just recently. Now, I never met the man personally, but I knew that was a well-known name in the town of Hampton. And I knew this simply is that they had power. In fact, some family members worked in the court system also. So what I'm trying to say simply is that he almost got away with everything. He almost got away with it. He was looking for money, and so that was a way of basically them being killed or whatever, or actually whatever it was a way for him to get money and his child. Pretty pretty sick, isn't it? So that's, and then, this is how things are, folks. And and lawyers are not, they're just, and another person I actually went to, another fourth lawyer, a different one. I sat there in his office for at least, I came there on time. Actually, was there 15 minutes before. I listened from his office. He was talking about something to do with his internet service. Even though I was there, his secretary knew I was there. He continued to talk as though his own time. He disrespected me as a human being, you see. And I sat there and I said, no, I could have walked out. I said, no, I'm going to wait till he comes out and meets me. So I waited, and eventually comes out to me. And I'm here to serve you. And I says, no, you're not. You wasted my time. I was here. He said, well, I'm here. And then I said, no, I don't need a damn lawyer like you. And I walked out. This is how smug these people are. They see themselves above you. And unfortunately, they are above us because they have destroyed this country in many ways. And, I don't know how this is going to happen. So the only way I know how to deal with this simply is to read and share books and information to get people to be aware of what's going on before their eyes, because these people are destroying this country for money. And they are a foreign entity. They are a foreign enemy, folks. The bar is not the United States. It's a British group. And in a lot of ways, it's simply similar to what we call almost similar to what we call like the Masons. They have their own way, they have their own rules, and they get away with whatever they want to get away with. And they can do whatever they want to, and they're above the law. That's what they are. And their own people none will fight them. If you bring something up to them saying that they will not, it's a fraternity, folks. That's what it is. It's a fraternity. And they don't police themselves, you see. They're enormously corrupt. So again, this book by Fred Rodell is actually from a professor at Yale University. I would say basically probably the Yale School of Law. And I feel like this needs to be shared with people to see what has happened or what has been done with. And it's interesting that Fred Rodell spends this time because he's seen a lot of things change. And what he's seeing is simply what took place in the early 1900s, and then gradually it's been watered down, and it's continued on. This is 100 years later, and it's gotten to the point it's ridiculous now. And that's why he says simply even back then, and even from the book what I've been reading, The Rape of Justice, by Eustace Mullins, they themselves are the ones. There are more lawyers in this country than any other country in the world, and there are more lawyers in the city of Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, than anywhere else, probably in the United States. And they're the ones who are basically they're not committing suicide, they're destroying this country. Let's just say it that way. Because they just write laws such and such. And it's a way for them to make money. And it's also a way of, dealing with victims, you see, and taking advantage of them also. I hate lawyers. They're despicable. I spit on them. Then you say, well, that's pretty radical. No, I actually was going to be a lawyer, guys. I was looking into it, and I realized this is not for me. I knew that simply as my moral integrity told me simply is that how could I somewhat, and I saw this, how can one lawyer one day be supposedly throwing this guy into prison, so to speak, and then maybe another time, another lawyer who's working for the defense or whatever is making money on the other side for getting him out. Do you follow? So no wonder the police departments are so frustrated because they spend all their time trying to get these people, put behind bars, and then the next thing you know, they're out on some technicality, which is what they create. They create this stuff out of thin air. And they've gotten to the point simply is they can get away with it. It's the last thing you want to do is to deal with a lawyer, folks. It really is. I can't say too much more valuable than is even with doctors, But, it's very clear, even in Jesus' time, the days of Jesus, simply, there were some groups that he basically stood out against, even if you don't believe he even lived, which I don't know if he did or not. But the point simply is that he spoke about lawyers, he spoke about the religious system that he was involved in, and he spoke out against the bankers, which create money out of nothing. You see, that's what we deal with in this country since the early 1900s, 1913, with the Federal Reserve System. And most people are completely blind by it because they don't know anything what it's going at. Where does this money come from? Where's it created, such and such? They just create it out of thin air too, just like law. It just comes out of thin air. And we've lost our morals. We've lost our balance in life about what anything is. What is right and wrong? We know what's right and wrong, but not with these lawyers and not with these bankers, you see. And I did also way back probably 2 months ago, I've done a deal with what I call a case that took place in the state of Minnesota. And the important part simply is that there was at least a lawyer, not a lawyer, but a judge who knew the law and did not allow it to get dealt with. It was the first big blow in how the banks create money, because the case is a very important case. It's the only successful case I know of is when they talked to the banker and they asked simply, where does this money come from that this guy is paying for his house? He says, oh, we just create it out of nothing. He states that in the words, and that's what they do. So all the people in this country, we are indeed the creditors of this country, not the debtors. And I keep pointing this out for people to make you aware that you are a creditor. So when they come to you and you sign your name, that is when you put your life on the line, when you sign something with your signature and your autograph, you see. And what you do is you put yourselves in a perilous times because simply as you're taking responsibility. Well, guess what? They have what they're called accounting, and they create something on one side of the deal, and then you've got to pay the rest of it. That's what goes on. All this stuff that took place during Roosevelt's time, when he confiscated the gold and silver from the gold, not the silver, but the gold from people, it caused people not to be able to pay their bills. You see, because a note is a debt instrument. It's not money. And that's what we have. $1 bills. It's a note. It's a Federal Reserve note. It's not money. It's just paper. It's just created out of nothing. And that's why we're having enormous hyperinflation. We haven't seen anything yet, folks. This is just the beginning of the last 2 or 3 years. It's going to get really bad in this country. It's going to get so bad. It's going to be just like the countries of Argentina, Venezuela. All that's going to occur here because they create money out of nothing. Massive inflation going to take place. No one's going to be able to afford hardly anything. I suggest people, I'm not trying to scare you. That's not the point here. Now, I don't want to scare anybody. I just want to Explain to people simply is it's time to get serious and realize we're all in a perilous time. These are serious times, folks. Whatever's happening right now is serious. And what you think is worth something may not be worth something. But I know this much. The main things you need to have is a place to stay. You need to be able to have food and water, and you need to have a way of protecting yourself. Those are the basic deals, you see. And if you don't have that way of dealing with such and such, then you are dependent upon someone else. And when you're dependent on someone else, that puts you in a dangerous position. That puts you in a dangerous position because you no longer have any money that's worth anything anymore, you see. But we don't eat paper dollars, folks. We eat food. And so it's critical that you have these things such as water, food, any of that nature, such and such, so you can take care of yourself. And folks, it's not going to be a 3-month deal. It's going to be a long time. And so I recommend people growing their own food, you see. But these things are just, we're living in we're on the edge here, seriously. That is here in America. But it's also all the West. It's not just be here in the United States is going to happen. This whole thing is going to destroy Europe. It's going to destroy the United States, Europe, and it's going to destroy probably the country of Japan, who's also very much dependent upon the United States, probably Korea, all those countries. It's going to have an effect on all kinds of countries, you see, and people's way of living. It's going to change dramatically. What used to be what we think is important will no longer be important, you see. And we also don't have what I call simply a system of justice anymore, that the victims have all the rights instead of the ones who done wrong, you see. In other words, it's all against those who are victims, and it's all to the perpetrators that are rewarded. So law has been completely reversed, just flipped. It's just not now. It's been going on for what he says, Fred Rodell, even that time period. He's talking about simply inverted. It's being changed in his time. Okay, well, I won't continue my talk here. I appreciate all that's here. And it's perilous times we are living in. Make the best of your time, and that's what I'm doing now, just to share with people invaluable books that actually are telling the truth. And again, I wish you a good night. You take care and have eyes to see and ears to hear. Good night.